real treat because we're bringing you 3 amazing panelists that are going to contribute various angles to our conversation as we move fast and furious through the sales enablement topics that matter most to you. So why are we doing this? Well, this is, for all intents and purposes, a preview of our SELL conference that is scheduled to happen in the fall in Old Town Alexandria, and it's going to happen from October 28th to the 30th. And I'm almost certain that I know what you're thinking. Wow, it's a really busy time of year. There's a lot of other conferences. Why would I choose ATD SELL? Well, when you think about ATD, chances are you think a lot about our large conference, the one we just had in May in New Orleans. And it was amazing. We had 10,000 people, phenomenal keynotes, and it was, like drinking from a fire hose. We did have a great sales enablement track, panels, and so forth. And I bet that a number of you who have joined us today found out about this webinar because I hit the pavement pretty hard promoting it. But here's the thing, our contribution to the sales enablement community does not end with the big global conference. In the fall, we have a number of boutique targeted events focused on drilling a mile deep and giving you the latest and greatest when it comes to developing sales capability. And so if you haven't heard of this event before, this webinar is designed to give you a preview into what you can expect. In fact, all 3 of our panelists will be there, both in the main stage and beyond. So keep that in the back of your minds. I want to give you one other thing before we get to know our panelists a little bit more. There are a lot of sales enablement events you could choose to participate in, either virtually or live. And so what makes SELL different? Well, SELL focuses exclusively on the art and science of developing sales capability. So it is a comprehensive but defined swim lane into an overall broad profession. So we focus in on everything related to developing better performance, better capability in your frontline sales, your managers, and beyond. And so what does that include? Everything from strategic planning, so we don't become sort of like a deli counter, just requests incoming. No, we want to lead from the front and be strategic about the way that we develop capability. Design, piloting, deployment, reinforcement, and ultimately quantifying our value through data storytelling so that leadership in our business can fully appreciate the work that we're doing to support the go-to-market plan. So if your role is responsible for that type of focus, then the SELL event is for you. More on that later, but for now, I'd like us to get to know our panelists a bit more and the angle that they're going to take as we go through our various topics. And so with that, I'm going to start off with Mike Kunkle, who is a fan favorite at ATD and at SELL. As he mentioned, he is an author. And Mike, I'd love for you to just tell our audience a little bit more about your background, what you love about SELL, and really what kind of angle you're going to bring to our discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Dayna, and hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. As Dayna said, I'm Mike Kunkle. It's Kunkle if you want to hunt me down on LinkedIn. This is, brace yourself, my 40th year in the sales profession and 30th in some sort of sales performance improvement role. And I've had all the titles: sales training, sales performance development, sales effectiveness, sales enablement. And today I'm the VP of Sales Effectiveness Services for Sparks IQ. It's a 100% client-facing role, helping our customers improve their sales performance in a variety of ways. I'm also the co-author of Modern Sales Foundations. It's a sales methodology and sales training program. The author of Sales Coaching Excellence Program and author of the Building Blocks of Sales Enablement book, published by ATD Press. Thank you, ATD. And also a course on the building blocks as well. At SELL this year, I'm going to be speaking about driving outcomes with enablement, how to make an impact. Now, on the conference itself, I would say ATD SELL is honestly my favorite enablement conference of the year. It's big enough to be diverse, right? We bring together enablers, trainers, talent development pros, all of whom focus on sales talent development. We all know that sales enablement is very broad and cross-functional, but for me personally, probably the most fun and the most impactful of what I've done over the years has been focused on developing competencies, developing sales talent. And because of that diversity, it draws good speakers, evidenced by my two cohorts here today. And yet it's still small enough to be an intimate setting for networking and having great conversations. I've left the conference every year and I've attended every one with new connections, new people to reach out to and network with. And so it's, again, for me, my favorite conference of the year.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I know he's a pretty humble person, so I'll just say that his sessions are standing room only year after year. And so finally, and better late than never, we promoted him to the main stage, and he will be closing us out in a very powerful way on Wednesday morning. So if you like Mike, his content, then again, he's going to be one of our main stagers at this event. Another main stager and somebody who I have really enjoyed getting to know over the last year and a half is Amber Watts. What's so interesting about her journey is that she is an onboarding expert, and she is somebody who really has come up through that traditional L&D path. And she was recently recognized for her outstanding contributions in her business and was promoted to CRO. And so we are always talking about aligning ourselves to the CRO, really understanding, their goals and being seen as valuable. And so to some extent, having her kind of switch sides a bit, I just think she's going to bring so much more amazing perspective from the trenches at SELL this year. And so, Amber, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the awesome introduction, Dayna. And as Mike says, I've now moved over to the dark side. But no, as Dayna said, I have been in a number of roles within L&D and enablement. I've always supported sales throughout my career, no matter what title I've had or held. But I had a unique journey where I always reported up to an executive. I had a direct line to my executive, and I think that is where my path has brought me at this point. I'm very involved in the ATD world as well. So I think a lot of just those connections and being able to lean on people, going to events like SELL and going to events like ICE or the International Conference and learning from other people in my industry has really helped, just always being open to different perspectives as well. So what I'm most looking forward to about SELL this year, because last year was the first time that I got to attend in person. I had attended virtually in the past. I got to attend in person. And I got to lead a session last year as well, one of the concurrent sessions or breakout sessions. And I found that this conference allowed a lot of time for those conversations that sometimes feel rushed or they feel forced. And I felt like SELL was such a good blend of giving you topics to talk about, but also giving you space to be able to talk about the things that were important to you and why you showed up to that event in the first place. The other thing that I thought made it really unique compared to other conferences I've gone to is that they handpick their speakers. It's not through this rigorous RFP process. You don't leave a lot of things to chance. They're very intentional about who they bring that year and the topics that get covered. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone and leading one of the activities where we get to talk about how to apply a lot of the things that we're learning at SELL. So
awesome. Thank you, Amber. Peter Ostrow really needs no introduction. I mean, his research is renowned in our space. And if you sort of explore his catalog or portfolio of topics, it is beyond exciting just how much he has contributed to our profession, specifically around topics related to developing sales capability. He's also a board advisor for Revenue Enablement Society, which for those of you who may or may not know, we actually enjoy a very friendly, warm relationship with RES. And so naturally, when Peter reached out and expressed his interest in contributing to our program this year, we did not hesitate to offer him a main stage slot because we're really excited about how he's going to help frame the topics and conversation through the lens of research. And so with that, Peter, share us a little more about maybe your interest in why you wanted to hop aboard the SELL train this year and anything more related to your background.
Sure. Thanks, Dayna. Hey, everybody. So I am a Boston-based Go Celtics New Englander who was in sales and sales management, a little bit of enablement and ops for quite a long time. And then the sort of second chapter has been as an analyst working for a couple of different organizations. That's a blast because we get to understand through research here at Forrester what good looks like out there without any kind of an agenda. We're all bombarded day in and day out with facts and figures, and trying to parse out what's real, what's fake, what's objective, what's subjective is kind of hard. What I love about the research that we do here is that there's no end in mind. There's no, leading of the witness. We find out what good looks like, and then we convert that into ways to help customers be great at enablement. So that's a lot of fun. And what I'm looking forward to at SELL is the opportunity to reframe a little bit the way we look at sales education. Those two words don't always go well together. We know as a fact that most adults, especially millennial and Gen Z adults, and more high-performing sellers than low-performing sellers want to commit to lifelong learning. They want their organizations to provide it. However, in the service of making their numbers and doing their day in and day out jobs, they tend to not have the opportunity to feel comfortable leveraging that. So we're going to talk at SELL about our sales learning framework and dig a little bit deeper into the what, when, how, and who to introduce learning that matters in a way that is comfortable for folks who are in a sales or other customer-facing role. And my big interest in going to SELL for the first time is to see what everybody thinks about it. Again, just as our research is objective, we don't really worry about whether the results are A or B. It'll be interesting to find and meet and speak with you folks there in Virginia to understand whether this resonates or not. And then we'll take our learnings from that event and apply it to the next generation of how we support folks.
Awesome. Well, we spent a little bit more time by design on introductions because, as we've made clear, the experience of this event is not just the topics or the content, it's the expertise in the room and your ability to access and tap into that expertise. And so wanted to take a little bit more time so you could really understand our three panelists, what perspective they're going to bring to this conversation. And then if you join us in October, you'll already sort of have a familiar face to reach out to and start amazing discussions with. And so from here on out, let me kind of give you the end in mind in terms of the 4 segments or 4 topics that we are going to explore in the next few minutes together. We're going to keep the conversation moving and fast. And we invite you to chat your questions or comments along the way. We may choose to leave some of them to the end, or if they're vital to extending the topic, we may go ahead and just offer up that question to our panelists. So please, as you have commentary or questions, chat them in. Because we want to hear from you. So 4 segments to this time together. We're going to first begin with general trends and observations because it is June and we're halfway through the year at this point. Love to hear from our panelists what they're seeing, feeling, and thinking. Then we're going to go into the topic of how do we amplify onboarding. And so whether you're just building an onboarding or trying to perfect it, we're going to touch on ideas and practices around amplifying onboarding. We're going to talk about, have a spirited conversation around the topic of driving adoption or not. And then we're going to go into the value of development because all of us want to raise the strategic profile of the work that we do in our organizations. And there are no better people to weigh in on this topic than our 3 panelists. And so with that, actually, Mike, I'm going to kick us off with you and your thoughts. Again, it's June. The year is half behind us. Just based on what you're seeing, the conversations you're having, what's happening now in sales enablement, and more specifically as it relates to developing sales capability in the organization? What are you seeing?
Well, a lot of stuff goes flying by in my feed on LinkedIn, and I don't know if anybody's heard of this or not. There's this thing called AI, right? And AI, everything and everywhere, in machine learning, and the apps that are being developed and what's happening with Chat GPT and generative AI. So that's probably one of the biggest topics I hear about. And for probably the 5th time in my career, I've heard that sales is going to be replaced by a button. And some of that may eventually happen with transactional selling, but I don't think that consultative B2B sellers are going anywhere anytime soon. the old Bill Gates quote about we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate its impact in the long term probably plays out here. Data-driven decision-making is something that I'm hearing more and more about. And it's odd because in most organizations, they can't seem to find a report that will help them determine whether someone needs help in a particular area, but there sure is a ton of data, right? And translating that to insights is something that I'm hearing more about. Prospecting and demand generation are hot topics, and it's getting tougher and tougher to actually break through the noise, especially in the horrible ways that the average seller is approaching the market and doing pitch slaps and data dumps, as opposed to going out with insights and perspective. Job searching and career management and enablement is hot right now. It is a tough market, and a lot of people were downsized. Cross-functional collaboration, always hot. And the one that boggles my mind, and we'll talk more about this, is whether or not enablement should be held accountable for making an impact on results. And I'm hearing more and more about this topic of impact and enablement, and I'll be talking about that at SELL. But I think if knowing enablers as I do as we move into summer, Dayna, I think the summer topic is Corona and lime with a beach chair.
Things could be worse, I suppose. Amber, Peter, general observations from your end?
Yeah, I would say, I think we're still experiencing some of the shock waves of the earthquake of COVID. A lot of people were laid off from it in the enablement world. And this is not an absolute statement, but I think a lot of them are falling into two buckets right now. One bucket could be they're stepping into a role where enablement hasn't really existed in the organization because they had laid off the last person. So the sellers, it's been a while, and the managers, it's been a while since they've had to engage with enablement. And then there's this other bucket where they might be the first enablement hire in their organization, or it's been so long, it feels like it. A lot of turnover has happened because of COVID. So the last bucket, it's almost like online dating, right? You're going through and you're meeting all of your frontline managers for the first time, and you're trying to get them to like you, but you're also trying to understand who they are, what they're about, what makes them tick. And so with either one of those buckets, it's also an election year. And as somebody who has spent some years in enablement as well, election years have been some of the hardest, because it seems like those are the years in which C-suite's really hesitant to let you launch a new initiative, or they hold back a bit on making bold decisions or bold changes because they're not really quite sure how things are going to shake out. And it's really hard then from a budget standpoint with enablement to go ask for those things, but then also being able to determine which initiatives you get to drive before the end of the year as well.
Good point. Peter, what about you?
I'll definitely pile on, or perhaps hopefully amend a little bit of what Amber and Mike have brought up. On the topic of career stability and enablement, it's not in a healthy place right now. Directly related to that is this issue, Mike, about how we validate that what we're doing has a contribution to either this ephemeral bottom line that we may or may not be able to impact. Are the relationships causal? Are they corollary? Are they not at all? And we can get into more of that today, certainly. But I also see it as a moment where enablement practitioners are not grasping hard enough onto the opportunity to self-identify and self-promote and self-measure and become leaders inside their organizations. That's a lot. So maybe I should unpack that a little bit. I believe that every time someone writes, posts, or says, what is enablement, is a severe detriment to our industry, because we kind of should know what we're doing for a living after 15 or 20 years. And by trying to gaze at our navels and determine what are we all about, I think it takes the conversation away from the big boy table, which is where enablement should be sitting. So getting into the metrics and the measurement, which we will shortly today, is one path towards doing that. The other path towards doing that is AI. So, Mike brought this up as obviously the 800-pound gorilla that's in every room that we walk into. One of the things that astonishes and kind of depresses me about AI is we have done some research into this, and we find that specifically when we talk to enablement leaders, only a very small minority of them have indicated at this point, 29%, that yes, we understand what kind of impact it could have on our organization. Now, the number is higher for high-performing organizations, 44%, lower, the low-performing organizations. But the question wasn't even, are you accomplishing great things with AI? The question was, do you just get it? And yet, when Forrester talks to generative AI project leaders, more than half, 56%, say we have active in the field content generated AI initiatives in our sales organization. So the disconnect between the people who are moving and shaking on the hottest topic since ever, Y2K, I guess, for those of us who do or don't know what that was, and the enablement folks who have the opportunity to leverage it, it's disconcerting. And I'll wrap up by saying, when I talk about the opportunity to leverage AI, most of the people in our space are already paying for fantastic AI capabilities, generative AI capabilities with your revenue enablement platform, the tool that you use from all the well-known vendors, which provides you with the content management and with the learning and development and the readiness capabilities. They all have great AI capabilities. You're already paying for them. It's a wonderful opportunity to leverage those and to become seen less as a follower and more as a leader inside your organizations. Ultimately, I'd love to see that be one of the pathways that people choose to get rid of so many green banners on LinkedIn.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that the tools and the resources that may be available to this profession to elevate value within the organization and truly kind of be the in-house SME when it comes to leveraging AI for enhanced productivity and so forth, then in some cases we may be forfeiting that for any number of reasons, but we have the opportunity to lean into it and thus sort of secure our footing, at least for the time being, as somebody who is more indispensable than not.
Agreed. Most of our colleagues are thinking, oh, should I go out and buy some AI? Do I have budget for that? And enablement's already paying for it, seriously. And we want to make sure there's a distinction, by the way, between AI and ML. You go down to Stop and Shop and buy some AI on aisle 4. Oh, over on aisle 7 is a specialty on ML. I'll just pick up one of each. No. Artificial intelligence is stupid. AI simply takes what you are doing manually, whether it's good or bad, and does a lot more of it at an infinite scale. ML, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's learning from what happens. And the ultimate promise of these revenue enablement platforms that, candidly, Dayna, 3-5%, I think, of their customers are actually leveraging, is to really be able to identify automatically which assets are working and which ones are not, which plays are working and which ones are not, which learning paths are working and which ones are not. And the possibility of replacing sellers with machines, Mike, I totally agree at the mid and above level of complexity of selling, but sellers will be replaced by sellers who are better at using prompt engineering and related skills, as will enablers.
And I just want to jump in really quick, because this is where I think the rubber meets the road for all of us. And this is where it's exciting to get together at SELL, because what you just said, Peter, is what I've been also saying for the last 6 to 8 months, which is, when we look at competencies to drive capability, it's no longer going to be, competencies and skills from 5, 10, 20 years ago. I mean, some of those fundamentals are always going to be in play, but we need to be thinking differently about, are we teaching salespeople prompt engineering? Are we teaching them to perform as the human in the sales loop? Sales process and our role within that is going to become more critical, because you got to anchor AI to something standard and repeatable. So I guess I just get really excited when you say stuff like that, because I say to myself, there's practical implications for not just becoming curious about AI, but adjusting our methods, processes, skills, capabilities, competencies to meet this new sort of intersection of human and tech.
Yeah, I think the shame is that right now I am seeing more horrible use of AI to take the worst prospecting approaches you can imagine and proliferate them in high volumes. And that's the unfortunate piece, is that it's being misused, as opposed to right? I've been playing a lot with prompting and taking some prompting courses, and there's so much value in learning how to do that and what you can get out of it to speed you or to better understand a prospect or to better understand a new industry, right? As opposed to taking a horrible prospecting approach and proliferating that, across people who aren't even your ICP. And that's what I'm getting a ton of on LinkedIn is people selling things that I don't even buy in a horrible approach that's product centric versus problem centric. I could go on, right? But I think we're going to have to battle through this horrible use to get to the point where it's being used intelligently.
Makes sense. Well, I think that's great for sort of a broad-based, what's on our mind, what are we seeing, where's the chatter coming from as we head into the summer. I feel like we could probably chat for 2 hours on the possibilities and the pitfalls of AI. But let's kind of go back a little bit to last year. And Amber, I'm going to kind of direct this to you because you're authoring a book on this topic and you are one of our experts when it comes to onboarding. So last year, you'd be hard pressed in your conversations with people at this event to find somebody that either wasn't building or in some cases looking at sort of fine tuning and amplifying onboarding as a program. It's just something that got a lot of oxygen. So I would love just to kind of hear your perspective, Amber, as it relates to, where people are with onboarding. What are you seeing people doing and what should they be thinking about for the back half of this year, the next 6 months? What are you seeing in terms of where people are at with onboarding and what would you like to see them striving towards?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to onboarding, I think a lot of times we just think about the end date. How quickly can we get them through? We get a lot of pressure from the top, like these people need to get onto the floor. They need to start selling immediately. And that's all fine and great. But especially in my book, a lot of what I talk about is taking more of a systems approach where we actually just remove onboarding as this formal program, this formal event where there is this strict end date and we just shove them off the metaphorical cliff and without a parachute. And instead, it's more about engaging your managers and having an understanding and more of like a partnership with them where you realize they are your biggest ally. They get to choose when sellers eat, when they take breaks, how they sell. The last thing you want is for a manager to say, okay, whatever they said in training, don't even worry about it. This is how we do it over here, right? And that is happening. And I usually start when I work with clients, a lot of the time I start off with asking them, how many frontline managers do you have in your organization? Whatever that number is, that's the number of unique onboarding experiences that are happening in your organization today, whether you know about it or not. So you need to be bringing them together. You need to be partnering with them. And I think enablement is in a really unique position compared to more of a formal L&D who might be handling onboarding for sellers, because a lot of us came up through the trenches, right? There's this camaraderie of going through this metaphorical war together, that we call sales. You have this sort of camaraderie with these managers that you didn't necessarily have as an L&D professional supporting these managers. So you already have this credibility that you need to be tapping into and leaning on. But when it comes to onboarding, an enablement versus the L&D side is L&D, you hear a lot of can they do it and can they do it well? And that's on you when you design their training. But in enablement, it's more of can they do it? That kind of falls on you. They need to be able to walk out of there somewhat able to stumble through something. But it's really on the manager if they can do it well. And you have to be in alignment with them to continue to support them over time, because onboarding is just sort of the launch phase. There is no end date in it. And as long as you have that partnership, you can take all that work that you put in and continue it and see its success over time.
2 things I love that you said. A, are they doing it? And oftentimes we settle for that. But number 2, B, are they doing it well? And then this idea of, I know your concept is everboarding, because we have this tendency, because so much is thrown at us, requests incoming, that we like to kind of have a defined start and end to our program so that we can then pivot and move on to something else that's the hotter fire. But you have a completely different philosophy. You're like, this really needs to be continuous. And I'm excited to kind of hear more about that from you at the ATD SELL Conference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amber, I really love your focus on the managers, right? I often joke on webinars, right? $1 to spend on sales training. I'd spend 75 cents on the frontline sales managers because they are the change management force. They are the onboarding force, right? You can teach reps anything, but if the managers aren't reinforcing it, coaching to it, helping people achieve mastery with it, right? Your onboarding is always going to be limited. I think this is always an evergreen topic, right? I think one of the things we don't ever say is the first step in great onboarding is hiring right? So you've got to get that piece correct. But the other thing I see missing a lot, Dayna, is a gap in thinking about performance milestones.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want these new people to do by when, and what result do they need to get to by when? And if it's a tier, right? If you can milestone those out, and then you look at this gaggle of content that people have to learn when they come on, and then you can start to chunk in sequence and layer that content logically to teach them from left to right the business process of what do they need to do on the job to get to performance milestone 1, and how does the manager need to support that. Then what do they need to do on the job to get to performance milestone 2, and how does the manager need to
real quick,
support that?
what's one of your favorite milestones? Because we always love specifics. What's an example of like a milestone 2 that you like?
Well, it might be, first of all, learning what's necessary to make an effective prospecting approach, and then it could be setting your first meeting, setting your second meeting, from discovery, then getting on to a qualified opportunity, right? You can set those leading indicator milestones to get to their first sale, right? Which would really be the performance milestone with other things that have led up to it. And then maybe it's the first month at quota, right? For that month, if there's monthly quotas, you just need to think through what are the things in the behaviors they need to perform to get to a lead indicator end, to get to the next lead indicator end, to get to the lag indicator. And then what's the next tier of that lag indicator? If they can do that once, can they repeat it? Or was it the fact that their manager was helping them so much along the way, they got them to that first one? How do you make it repeatable, replicable, scalable, so that you can get to predictable results with it? And if you chunk and sequence and layer your curriculum that way, and you get your managers to understand what you're teaching and how to support it, you have a chance of getting people to higher levels of performance faster. And the probably the best I've seen is I've done a 52% decrease in what was considered acceptable ramp time. But there have been others, right? 35%, 48%, right? But you can radically improve the performance of your new hires if you structure, right, based on performance milestones and coaching to get there, and chunk, sequence, and layer. So you're not taking this massive content and go, here, learn all of this in one chunk and then go forth and produce, because that's not how people learn, and it's not how you get them to fast, quick performance.
Awesome. Peter, close us out on this topic. Any insights, trends, observations on this? Yeah.
No, none at all. No. Obviously, yes. So let me limit my response to 3 items. Item 1, why do we collectively think of sales so different as we think of plumbers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, electricians, who aren't just taught a bunch of stuff and then released into the wild forever to do their craft? Ebbinghaus would be rolling over in his grave, because the fact is, the sales talent life cycle that Mike referenced, for us, it's attracting, onboarding, and optimizing, or everboarding your sellers, is always linked by the same kind of competency maps that one of us mentioned earlier on. What we find works best, point number 2 in onboarding, is this right here. You don't just train somebody with a bunch of stuff, flick a switch, and then they're ready to go forever. The forgetting curve, the ability to learn while doing, not by listening, watching, or hearing, all contribute to the idea that on day 1, I'm pretty much a learner. On day, pick a number, 90, I'm finally going to be a seller. But in between is the opportunity, and you ask Dayna for some very specific milestones. Maybe by day or week X, I have to have a certain number of discovery calls. I have to have a certain amount of pipeline. But the idea of blending out while blending in starts to allow us to learn and teach in a way that all of us who know anything about adult learning is going to be a lot more appropriate. I'll throw a bunch of statistics rapidly at you folks to prove that this is right. And it's not just a bunch of academics who have never sold anything or managed sellers, because that is not the way any of us on this panel have lived our lives. High-performing sales organizations, 14% more general training. High-performing sales organizations, 30%, 32% longer new rep training. High-performing reps report 28% more time before they interact with a buyer, 20% on the first day of the job, but we're not going to go there. And then high-performing organizations report 22% more field observations before they consider someone ready for duty. Third point, ready for duty is not a standard black and white concept. Couple of other statistics to help people, understand what best-in-class organizations do. For example, we look at high-performing reps and low-performing reps. High-performing reps are more than twice as likely to say, I was able to skip some aspects of onboarding because of my professional experience. Sort of like you take an AP class in high school, and if you get a 4 or 5, you opt out of first-year physics, calculus, whatever it might be. But conversely, here's a wild statistic. High-performing organizations are 53% more likely on the other end to prevent a new hire from entering their full role if they don't actually pass onboarding the right way. So what we're talking about here is not this monolithic, train them as fast as possible and get them into the field as a best practice. It's kind of a worst practice. What we're talking about is listen to the inner angels who talk about proper adult learning theory. That's your entire background, Amber, and it's a big focus for the wider ATD, and we're going to talk about it specifically to sales careers at SELL. By being a little more patient, by personalizing both the speed, learning modality, and content of onboarding, and the technology is all there to do this without tons of extra resources, we're going to turn out better sellers who are more engaged, higher performing for more years to come, which is all good for customers, companies, and the sellers themselves.
Love it. So let's put a pin on this topic because there's so much more to cover, and we'll keep the conversation going at SELL in the fall. In the meantime, I'd love to have us pivot towards a topic that I think is in the back of our heads at every interval. And I know as far as this group is concerned, we have a couple of hot takes on it, and that is driving adoption. And so just to kind of frame this up for everybody, it's easy to get caught up in the process of design and piloting and rolling out of our development initiatives, and then just return back upstream because we've got a long laundry list of requests coming in left, right, and everything from the business. And so we just kind of say, well, what's next on our list? We've checked the box. Let's let this thing keep running. But yet we all have this voice in our head screaming at us. We have to drive adoption because adoption is what reproduces the outcomes that we feel are necessary to keep this perception that we're bringing value back to the business. And so I know you all have kind of different perspectives on this. Let's talk about driving adoption. What are some ways either we can double down on it or rethink sort of some of our prevailing assumptions about our role related to adoption? Who would like to chime in first?
Well, we all sort of talked about this a bit in advance, and I don't think we're all that far off, right? I think the prevailing message, and everyone can clarify their own perspective, but adoption is on the path toward what really matters, which are the outcomes that you're trying to drive, the impact that you want to make. You don't get the outcome that you're looking for if you don't get adoption, but adoption can't be the end game. And I think far too many enablers sort of stop at, oh, I helped a behavior change happen, or, hey, we got this particular thing adopted. That's not the end. So there are some interesting stats on this, though, and I'm sure that Peter has them from Forrester as well. But I've seen a bunch of reports showing that companies that adopt a formal process and a formal methodology outperform those who don't. And that level of performance impact increases with the level of adoption. And the one study I'm thinking about the two biggest jumps were 75% and 90% adoption, and it correlated to higher levels of performance. Now, contrast that to this stat, right, from one of the ATD State of Sales Training reports, where 59% of respondents said the single biggest barrier to sales training success was the inability to get sellers to use what was taught. Now, adoption on the path to getting better results, and there's a correlation of using a process and formal methodology, and yet 59% of respondents to a survey say we can't get reps to use what we're teaching. What's wrong with that picture, right? And if we don't do things purposefully, right, to Peter's point on onboarding, if we're not looking at how people learn and how you do change management in organizations, and to Amber's point about getting those sales managers involved and engaged in this, and people learn, they have to remember, they have to do some kind of practice and preparing, they have to apply something they've learned in the real world, and then just because they learned it, remembered it, practiced it, and applied it doesn't mean they did it well or that they'll do it again. So someone has to coach them and hold them accountable to get the mastery eventually over time. And when you get to that point, you've got some level of adoption, but then have you taught the right things and gone through that whole path so that now you can lift results? And that to me is the formula that I've seen work. You have to know you're starting with something. If you get them to do it, it will move the needle. You have to go through that path that I call the 5 stages of sales mastery and behavior change: learn, remember, practice, apply, and master through coaching and reinforcement and systems, and then measure and watch the results lift. If you don't get the results, the likelihood is that something broke down along that path. Either it's not the right content, they didn't learn well, they don't remember it, they didn't practice it, they haven't applied it, and no one is coaching them to mastery. That to me is the formula, and adoption is a part of that, but it's not the end goal.
We have a quick comment here from attendee Leah Hackler, who says, and assuring that our sales managers don't tell their teams to do it like I do it. So I love that kind of real world reality check. Amber, I want to come to you next. Certainly as somebody who came up through the learning channel, that you no doubt had an affinity for adoption, reinforcement, behavior change. Now you're in a position where you can actually oversee and sort of direct the behaviors required to get that stickiness. So can you share with us a little bit about what you're doing in your business relative to adoption, whether it's your messaging around it or actually tactics that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I've had the privilege of always working in hyper-growth organizations, and you want to talk about change. It was constant. It was every day, it felt like. And at some point, I think people just become numb to it. And when I was in my enablement role, I was kind of that person of, they felt safe that they could talk to about it because they didn't report to me. And so I was a safe space. Having come into my role now, it's like, I know that they all have these sentiments that they don't openly share. So we've done a couple things. The first thing we've done is we've implemented cup sizes. So when we go to roll out a change, we identify as this small, medium, large, or extra large. And we say, if it's small, here's what goes into that. And that could be communication. It could be, if it's extra large, we have standalone training around it, but not everything requires that, right? Not everything requires me to pull my sellers away from what they're doing. And in fact, they don't like it all the time, right? So we identify how large the change is and then the impact that it's going to have on our sellers day to day, because back to that systems, as soon as you remove something that they grow used to, like their latte that they get every morning before work, if you change from, to sugar-free syrup instead, they're going to notice that those day-to-day things matter a lot, and people value autonomy. So again, the cup sizes is our thing. I make a lot of coffee analogies. I'm really starting to realize that. So that's a big part of what we do. But my thing is always keeping that communication open. So I have 2 standing meetings every week where I split my sellers into groups and I ask them like very specific questions, but it's also their time to say, here's what I'm really frustrated with. And I may not always have the solution, but at least I know this is something that should be on our radar because they're doing the job every day and they're driving our business. So if they have feedback, I want to hear it firsthand. So I dedicate 2 hours a week just to the seller voice and having that be a part of any of our change initiatives.
Appreciate that very much. So Peter, where are you at on this issue? Are you largely in alignment with our panelists, or do you have some different angle for us? +1. Do
So
tell.
Amber, I'll put a lot of emphasis and value on what you talked about. We refer to that as advocacy, communicating to and from the people who are in the field interacting with our buyers and customers. Require a filtering and an orchestration from the enablement team to eliminate or at least reduce the noise coming at them, but also the ear, the help desk, the concierge, the coach, the counsel to have the voice so that they can properly give to us who are behind the scenes what they are seeing out in the field with their customers. It's also certainly important from the standpoint of employee engagement, employee wellness, and employee well-being, all of which we have data that proves that, yes, even salespeople have feelings, that those measures of personal self-satisfaction and self well-being are directly correlated with people who sell more and stay around more. So on the topic of adoption, yeah, +1. I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. We look at revenue enablement leaders who say, we measure ourselves primarily by how much work we do. We measure ourselves primarily by how much our internal customers and constituents like what we do for them. We measure ourselves by how much folks adopt what we're doing for them, or we measure ourselves by what kind of impact we have on seller behavioral change or seller productivity. And then there's also a fifth, which is we measure ourselves by the lagging indicators, like did we hit our numbers as an organization? The companies that perform the worst are those that focus on adoption and on lagging indicators. The companies that perform the best are those that focus on quality. What do our internal customers have to say about what we're doing for them? Not every course is going to be awesome. Not every asset is going to win the Academy Award. Let's get over ourselves and be willing to learn. So not just the quality, but also the impact. What change do we have on seller behavior that our executives want from us? What change do we have on seller productivity, giving them more of the most valuable currency that they'll ever talk about, which is time. So anybody who is listening or thinking about this topic, whoever puts the word adoption in a revenue enablement charter or plan, stop it. Please remove it. It is a step on the way towards better measured results and impact. But if you focus on adoption, you are seen as nothing but the owner and purveyor of vanity metrics. That creates the sense of irrelevance, disrespect, and green circles on your LinkedIn profile that we talked about earlier in the call. Hopefully that was pretty clear, Dayna.
Yeah, that was pretty clear and had a little bite to it, Peter, but I think sometimes we need that type of reality check. And I think that's a conversation that, number one, is got to continue at this event. And I know you're going to help us work our way through that more. But I also think it tees us up beautifully for our last segment here, which is around kind of perceived value. And so just a quick shout out to our attendees. As we wind down here, if you have any questions or comments based on what the panelists have talked about so far, please go ahead and chat those in. But just to kind of take our final lap here around this fast track of topics, you know, you talked about internal customers, quality, and really sort of our value comes down to how our internal customers all the way up to the C-suite perceives value and how well our deliverables are aligning with that perception. And so, you know, when we talk to enablers, and this certainly came up at SELL last year, it came up again at our global conference a few weeks ago, but it's to some extent our ability to communicate the work that we're doing in ways that is not perceived as vanity, but really has true depth and impact, you know, if in fact we're even supposed to own impact, Mike. But our ability to communicate and articulate how we are playing a key role in the success of the business is something that many enablers confess it's sort of a growth opportunity for them. they have not, perfected how to speak at a high level and in a way that resonates. And so, really the question I think we need to be asking is, what do our leaders need from us? What makes us value add, indispensable, et cetera, et cetera? So I'd love just to kind of go around the horn and have each of you comment on what you think leadership expects and should expect from enablement in terms of value, us being able to deliver and communicate value.
Alignment, right? And it has to start with the type of strategic planning in enablement that the business does. And so, I use a concept in discovery called a situation assessment. What's the current state, the challenges and opportunities there and the impacts of those? What's the desired future state, the outcomes the customer's looking for and the priority of those? The gap analysis tells you what would they need to go from point A to point B, and then you can do an impact analysis of that, and you can use that to create a compelling business case. That's what a good seller should do, right? And it's the same exact thing that enablement leaders should do, right? Working with the senior leaders, what's the current state? What's the desired future state? What are the needs? What would have to happen to go from point A to point B? And then what's the impact if you get there? And then you can do a force field analysis, right? What are the things that are driving you forward to get where you want to go? What are the things that are holding you back? And what are you going to do to add or strengthen driving forces or reduce or eliminate restraining forces? And you create plans for enablement that align to where the leaders want to take the business and close the gaps in performance that would help them get there. And I think if you start from that point, rather than saying, oh, we do training and content and tools, right, then you have a much better chance of making the impact that the business leaders want. That's, to me, how I would start a planning cycle in enablement.
I love it. Alignment. And then you kind of brought that to life. One last little tip that I give people is, don't use, to the extent possible, right? Don't use your own preferred language. Part of alignment is leveraging the language that your CRO or your C-suite wants to see or what they prefer. So tiny little tactic there, but it can make a big difference. Amber, your thoughts on value and communicating? I know you report directly to the CEO in your business. What can you share with our audience?
Yeah, I would say a lot of this has to do with having that seat at the table, right? You're trying to go earn that seat, but I think before you go ask for the seat, you need to know what's being discussed at the table first. So are you being proactive already? And are you having monthly or bi-monthly meetings with your senior sales leaders and having that proactive approach before you go ask for that seat? But then there's this other tactic that I myself used to use when trying to influence C-suite and whatnot, is that I went beneath them. There really wasn't anywhere else to go, but I went beneath them and I went to those sales leaders and I wanted to understand what was important to them. If I had a tool request, I'm going to go run it by them first, get their buy-in, get us into into agreement on how that tool is going to support them and their team. So then when I go make the pitch, I've already got them in alignment with me. And I think if you can create that alignment with your managers and you can show that you're able to have that type of alignment with just stakeholders, let's say, then you're going to get a lot more credibility from the C-suite and your ability to do your job, right? And if you can bring them then, again, pitch a tool, pitch a resource, do not make yourself a cost center. I've had many leaders tell me when I came into the enablement role after going through the interview process, they say, yeah, the last person didn't want to roll up their sleeves and do the work. They just wanted a tool to do it for them. And I heard that more than once. So you don't want to always just be asking for monies and resources. You want to make sure you have that alignment and have people on your side, because there's power in numbers and the right people on your side.
I appreciate that. Peter, close us out here on this topic.
We've already gone over the idea of metrics, but how they fit into a well-crafted revenue enablement plan that is hopefully agreed to and adopted, or at the very least socialized to other functional leaders. The charter, the plan, and then the who, what, when, where, why helps an enablement team and its leaders look a little bit more like polished professionals. And there are a lot of enablement folks who are unfortunately allowing themselves to be pigeonholed as task doers rather than strategy leaders. Unfortunately, it's the nature of our market right now. I know multiple folks who were, in the last few quarters, hired to lead an enablement team and then let go after SCO, which means we really just hired a temp to run our sales kickoff. That's so disrespectful to what the potential for this role can do. I think, Dayna, a lot of it has to do with understanding executive communications. Anybody who's got an enablement department or function is probably working for an organization that's large enough where you have to have some skill at the internal politics and communications. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are all in and around the sales space, so we know how to sell. Sometimes you have to do that internally. Hopefully you do it authentically. Hopefully you do it without any BS. But the net is how to speak properly with executives and peers and sponsors is a core skill, probably as important as prompt engineering for tomorrow's enablement leader.
I could not agree with you more. When people ask me, that's the advice that I give them. It's worthwhile to develop yourself professionally in executive level communication, visualization, simplifying things down to the headlines, and good old-fashioned confidence, because recommendations and even difficult messages are often better received when you're seen as competent and confident. And so with that, due to time, I'm going to leave the conversation right there. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Mike, Peter, and Amber, for walking through this very fast track of topics and lending your insights. You did not hold back, and we really appreciate it. And to all of our attendees, this is just, again, a taste, a flavor of what you can expect in October. We will be at an amazing property this year. It's called Hotel AKA, and it is just going to be such a fun time to get together and really dig in. In the meantime, if you are not connected to all of us on LinkedIn, I invite you to do that. Don't hesitate. And we did try to field questions and comments as they came in, but if you think of something after the fact or you watch this recording, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'll do my best to answer whatever kind of questions that you may have about this webinar or the event. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to our webinar host, Regina.
All right, fantastic. This actually concludes today's webinar. This was great. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webcast.td.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. And please visit our event calendar. Sign up for future webcasts.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.